Hello Gothic friend, this is Alice and you are in Gothic Land, a place where you find about your true self. And today I bring you a new episode. It's actually an interview. In this interview on our section, The Road to Self-Recognition, I have for you Dr. Alessandra Pino, who is actually the co-writer of A Gothic Cookbook. This book is fantastic, it's very special, and you're going to see why. It's nothing like what you're thinking about a Gothic cookbook. You're probably thinking about arms and legs and more into the horror side of things. But actually, you're going to be very surprised of the Gothic elements, how beautiful the book is, about the recipes. You're going to find out about the Alessandra's and all the other collaborators' journeys. You're going to learn a lot about identity and how much we can find how much about ourselves we can find in the projects that we take in life. So come with me to this interview. You're going to love it. You're going to learn tons of things. You're going to learn how, from the moment that the idea is created, is born until the time of making it real, how that is for the Gothic space, which is actually a space that a lot of people still misunderstand. So I hope you're ready because the journey is fantastic. So I'll see you there. Hello, good morning for us, Alessandra Pino, Dr. Alessandra Pino. How are you today?
Hi, Alice. It's lovely to be here. I'm fine. I'm even better now that I'm a doctor.
It makes a difference, doesn't it? It's like, well, yeah,
I can cure myself.
well done. First of all, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
And welcome to Gothic Land, a place where we discover ourselves through many different Gothic aspects. And we have you here because, I've been trying to interview you for a long time, but we're all so busy.
I know.
That it's never, to find the time, it was difficult. But this book of yours, we're going to talk about a book that you're writing together with someone else. And the reason why I wanted you here is because obviously the Gothic aspect of things, but also because we can find and learn so much. I mean, the last time we were talking, I thought, oh my God, I never thought of these things, of these aspects. And we're going to do that bit of a journey through your experience with your writing your book, with food, why the Gothic, why identity in this case as well, all the things that we can find and we can learn. And this is what we're going to be doing, people. So as always, I like doing my little slides.
What is this?
There you go. This is our presentation.
Wow.
Yes, that's what I was asking you about pictures.
Amazing.
Like, okay, let's get this collage done. Yeah, this is what we're going to be talking about today. It's a section in Alice in Gothic Land. I have this section called The Road to Self-Recognition, and it's what we have here now in the banner. And It's a section that has started with Midnight Mass, analyzing the Gothic and the horror and identity and elements of the Gothic through Midnight Mass with Tuche Kutlu. And in one of our episodes, we mentioned you. Yeah, it was like we started, I think it was episode 4, and somehow, obviously, blood vampires came into it, and we said, yeah, food. Oh, that reminds me of Ali's book, and we started talking about it. So it was like, yeah, this is the time now to do this, to get on and talk to Ali. So
Thank you.
it's brilliant. We're all in this little space, aren't we? Before we go into the interview, because what I want to do is for our audience to know more about you, what you do, where you come from, and like the normal questions. But then we're gonna go in depth a little bit more into the rabbit hole of what is food and what the Gothic and what you've learned through all this process as well.
Sure.
So before we go into anything, people, supporters, you can find me in coffee.com, Alice in Gothic Land 1402, very romantic. This is the thing that coffee gives you. And in a moment, I'm going to give everybody how to support your project, but I don't want to give any spoilers yet. First, we're going to look at some things, and we're going to start talking a little bit about, I'm going to show these next.
We'll intrigue them first and then see if they want to support us.
Exactly. I'm sure they will.
Be deserved. If you don't like the idea, then don't support it.
Don't support it, but at least you've watched it, you've seen it. I think this is the teaser. These
are amazing illustrations by Lee Henry. So he's done the designs for and the illustrations, obviously, for each chapter.
Okay, yeah, we need to write his book as well, his name as well. So then when we're the references, yeah, that'd be fantastic.
Ella. So the first one is that we can see there is a cup of stars from The Haunting of Hill House. And then, and then on the top right is the wonderful tea spread in Rebecca. Yes. And then we have obviously a selection the bottom right with, I think at the front is Dracula. So with the paprikash dish.
Right. So it's amazing. So now we are intrigued already because you've been taking these recipes from different Gothic books.
That's right.
And why did you decide to do this? This is now when we start with your project, with the collaboration. So how did the idea pop up? I know that you've talked about this in many other places, but how did the idea pop up and why this format? And just take us through all that.
Well, I was doing a PhD in cultural memory and actually a Cuban-American writer called Cristina Garcia. And I began investigating on sugar and the violence on the plantations and how that translated in a literary sense. And I started getting interested in the idea of Gothic food. So normally when we think of food, we think of something joyous and bonding and happy and wholesome. But actually what goes in behind the process and production of food isn't necessarily those things. It can be extremely violent and quite detached from the world that we experience. We go to the supermarket and we pick out items without fully knowing in what way they have been produced or processed or how they've reached those shelves. And I was interested because obviously the Gothic is a genre where anxiety and violence and aggression and fear plays a very large role. And I started analysing how food functioned within those texts. And one of my best friends, whom I always speak to about food because she's a food journalist and a writer and researcher in food from a historical perspective, Ella Buchan, I started kind of speaking to her about all this. And for my birthday, she sent me a big book of stories by Edgar Allan Poe. And she said, Ali, this is for you, it's for your birthday. I said, it's so beautiful. she said, actually, I was looking for something to do with food and horror food and the Gothic and recipes, but I couldn't find anything. And that's when we decided that we ought to write that book. So that's how it all started. And so a bit of a strange beginning in a way, but connected to my PhD studies, which started 3 years ago and ended last week when I became a doctor finally. But yeah, in a way, the studies that I've done in memory also connect quite well to the Gothic, how we remember things and the function that food and the role that food plays in how we remember things. We might be reminded of a really wonderful memory or event, or we might be reminded of a person that's very influential for us. And that might be a good thing. But sometimes food can also remind us of things that are less pleasant.
Yeah. This is the thing that when you were talking to me, I thought, we were talking a couple of weeks ago, I thought, oh gosh, yeah, it's just, I've not thought of that. And it's really uncanny how we don't think about it. We know it. So this is where all the shadows are, but we don't really think about it like when you tell us. So is that kind of information that we can also find in the book, like behind the scenes?
Absolutely. So I'll just explain the structure of the book. It's going to be 13 chapters, and each chapter is dedicated to researching and explaining how food functions in that particular novel. And so there's a kind of essay at the beginning, and then there will be around 5 recipes per chapter. And the recipes are inspired by the food which is in those books. So for Dracula, we have paprikash, Hendel, and for example, Rebecca, we have cakes that you see in the spread as well here in the slide. Gingerbread cake. And then for Jane Eyre, we have the famous seed cake that she eats when she's at school. And so on. So there will be various recipes inspired by them. And I have to say the recipes are nice. They're not, because when people think of Gothic food, they think, oh, perhaps it will be something a little bit inspired by something gruesome, and it's not. The food in itself will be obviously a tasty recipe that you can reproduce. It's more analysing what food does in that context, and it's something unusual. In fact, this is the first Gothic cookbook that exists, so it's the first one in the world. There's no other.
This actually fascinates me, because when we talk about finding, creators, we talk about finding your niche. You find your niche through Ella going to this bookshop, trying to find something very specific, thinking about you. So that says a lot about her friendship with you. I need to find something that is especially just for my friend, that is for her, that I know she will love. So she already had created this book in her mind.
Yes.
And then she decided to find it, but obviously it wasn't there. And then she told you, and you found your niche. And there are people there that spend years trying to figure out their niche. And you found this fantastic idea together. And it's great because you can see just with the illustrations and how you were explaining the episodes and the chapters and how everything is elaborated. There's so much passion there. There's obviously, things that you found that you wanted to read, and you put it in a way that this book is almost like for you, but it can reach so many other people like you. So I think that's so fascinating and very inspiring for people who are in this space that think, well, the Gothic is only entertainment. Well, actually, no, look, we can actually teach through this entertainment. It's not just a pleasant book to read. It has a lot of research, isn't it? Because for every chapter, for every meal you've done, you've cooked these things, you've visited places. So tell us a little bit about how this process, how you've elaborated all these.
Yes, I think the Gothic is a kind of framework that we can use to analyse how food is used in this context, but it comes from putting together various different strands. So I just want to speak briefly about 2 very influential books when it comes to food and how we consider food. So we have Much Depends on Dinner by Margaret Visser. And she talks here about the role, for example, of women as gatekeepers of food, the idea of control, even down to the fact of how we use cutlery and how potentially it could be a dangerous utensil, but the way that we have been used to live socially with each other, we wouldn't feel threatened at the dinner table. But in some cases, things have happened at the dinner table, and perhaps we have used a spoon incorrectly to harm someone. It's the potential danger that exists, and I think what these Gothic texts do, because the Gothic is all about tension and anxiety and things that could happen, don't necessarily happen, but there is a potential there. And it's creating this sense of underlying fear and creepiness that we love about the Gothic. Then Sidney Mintz, with his book Sweetness and Power, talks about this, and specifically he looks at sugar. He talks also in general about processed foods and the threat that we feel today, living in a society where we don't fully know what goes into our food. So we have to be especially careful, and that weight seems to be all on us. It's a pressure that's on the individual now to work out, is this healthy? Is this organic? Where does this come from? What kind of meat is it? Can I trust the kind of meat that I'm about to eat? It says it's pork, but what if it's something else? And these kind of errors have happened in the past where we think we're eating one type of meat. Actually, it's another type of meat. Okay. So what does that do to us as a people, and the stress that that puts on our shoulders, especially if, yes, you're not just feeding yourself, you're perhaps feeding a family.
Sure.
So for me, the Gothic was just a great lens into this world of fear and danger that normally people wouldn't think when it comes to food. So, sure. Yeah.
So you've actually you started looking, obviously, when you do your research, and as you do your research, you realize that there are a lot of other things you can talk about.
Yes.
To make it really like believable, and you've been to places, you try the food, that you cook it, you try it, then from that experience, you actually put that in the book as well.
We're going to, through the recipes, we'll explain obviously why we use certain recipes, and it's more an exploration of the literary text. So for example, in Jane Eyre, where we take the seed cake and we try to go back to the original recipe of the seed cake, and then we will obviously make it our own. But the idea of why we use a seed cake is specific to how Jane feels in the text and what it means to her. So it's meant to signify something which is wholesome and comforting, because she is in a boarding school. She's had a terrible time at her aunt's house. She gets sent to this awful boarding school, and the head teacher is truly a tyrant, and she feels like she needs to escape from this. And Miss Temple, who is one of the nicer teachers, invites her into her room and says, here you go, let's share this seed cake. And in a way, one might look at that and think, well, that's really nice. It's a nice gesture. This is a moment of bonding and of love, really. But is it? Because in fact, they are both hiding in many ways and finding comfort. And it's a kind of secret rebellion, because the reason that Jane gets into trouble and that the teacher also gets into trouble is because they're eating bread and butter, and they shouldn't be eating this. After the porridge was burnt for everyone, they were meant to just go hungry. But the teacher says, well, no, let's have bread and butter. And then the head teacher reprimands her and humiliates her in front of everyone. So the teacher takes Jane and her friend and says, well, let's us have this seed cake, a quiet rebellion. So the idea of food as well, that it can have various sides and various ways in which you can interpret the gesture of food. Something which might seem comforting, but in fact, perhaps is full of sugar, isn't such a good idea. I mean, but it's seen as a gesture of love, which can harm. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's that double-edged sword that food can sometimes represent. That was what interested me. Yes.
Yeah, and you're making me think, and we were talking about this when we met last time, that we are actually using our children to make them obey that way. What
Yes.
messages are we sending them? You know, you get rewarded with poison by doing what I'm telling you. And that's how a child, you get accepted by mom and dad. And then as a child, you want to please your parents. And then there's this circle of reward through food.
Yes.
And if I'll give you more veg if you don't eat. I mean, now, thankfully, things have changed. And now we reward with nice veggies and things like that as well. Because some kids
With
like
fruit.
broccoli. Yeah, with broccoli. You know, my kids love broccoli.
It's a cauliflower.
Yeah, cauliflower. There you go. No, but with carrots, carrot sticks, and dippers that are more natural, we now more, and then we transmit that to them when we go shopping. But it's true that the reward is always chocolate and it's sugar. And what does that tell us about the identity that we're building? You know, we're reinforcing certain messages to our children that are kind of wrong. But it's also what you say, this manipulation. And in that passage that you just told me, there's so much information culturally
Yes.
in that food scene. And it's almost like I don't know about you, but when I read a book, I put music, and the music is like the soundtrack of the book, like when I'm watching that film. And almost like by trying or helping people try these recipes, when they eat that cake again, they're going to be thinking of that passage. They're going to be thinking about that book. So I think it's a beautiful way of expanding the reading. You know, that nowadays people are, people don't like reading. Some people still don't like reading. What about intriguing them into read more Gothic through food as well? How interesting.
It's just another door into another way of interpreting the text. And I think because food is such a subconscious part of our life as well, which we have to do, we have to eat at least 2 to 3 times a day. Normally we would eat, and it's something that we do. We don't give much thought to this, but Sydney Mintz talks about this a lot and says that because we live such a rushed life nowadays, we tend to overlap the pleasures. So the pleasure that food can give us is combined to the pleasure of doing something else at the same time, like watching a film, or we might be on our phones. So we might be doing 2 or 3 things while we eat. It's no longer eating in its primary function, which was a way of also bonding with others. So you would actually share food, and it would be a way to network. It's kind of the opposite now. We would probably more frequently eat alone, and it's purely to nourish us. But because of the nature of the food, which is, you know, often processed in a way that isn't nourishing, what are we actually eating? What ideas are we eating? So then all the advertising comes into it, and the images that we get from, you know, if we're drinking Coca-Cola, we're having a refreshing break, or if we're having coffee, which originally was meant to kind of wake us up, now it's actually a moment of relaxation. So even food can contain these contrasting messages, these mixed messages. And I find that really fascinating. And I think right at the beginning of my research, one of the first things that really made me curious and want to know more was, obviously I'm a big horror film fan, and I noticed that in nearly without fail, at the beginning of every film, there is some food item, a reference to food or a food scene in which we get to know the character that's about to be possessed, or that something terrible is about to happen. And they are eating something which can be, in a certain sense, interpreted as dangerous. So they're either eating a microwaved meal, they're eating something unhealthy, they are doing something that they shouldn't be doing in terms of food and food language. And then we kind of know, right, something's about to happen here. And perhaps in parallel to that, we've seen them that maybe being, you know, not eating meat, or being vegetarian, being vegan even, or protesting against, I don't know, eating meat. And suddenly we see that they start eating meat. So this is a clear signal that something has taken possession of their bodies and is now expressing itself through the body, because it's doing something in food terms and in the food language which doesn't correspond to how that character would have originally acted. So I'm thinking specifically of, for example, The Possession, where she is vegetarian at the beginning, and there's a whole scene at school where she's holding up posters, don't kill cows and don't do this. And then we see her possessed, open fridge, kneeling down, eating a raw steak dripping with blood. And we know she's been possessed. And obviously, then we do see the monster. We do see, but sometimes we don't. We just see this manifestation through food. And it's very powerful because we might not realize that we're so close to these food symbols, but there are symbols all around us. So, and we get an idea of the person and of a situation through food, and how one behaves through food as well.
Yeah, it's amazing because then we are going to be associating meat with something evil.
Exactly. So, well, in this, I think is the most important thing, that this type of analysis and analyzing what is evil in our minds and what is portrayed as evil in films is a lens into how we live today. So obviously eating meat a few hundred years ago was probably something quite difficult to do. Now nearly everyone can buy meat, and it's not, as expensive or as elitist as it was before. So the fact that, yes, vegetarianism and veganism is more important now for us, and that possession manifests itself through eating meat, is quite significant. So it's not seen, whereas in, for example, Frankenstein, we do vegetarian recipes because the monster is vegetarian, and he abstains from eating meat. So he abstains. He says, I'm not worthy of eating meat. So their meat is seen as something very valuable and precious, and being human is to eat meat. Whereas he says, well, I don't enter into this world because I am monstrous, so I will eat acorns. And in fact, we have a recipe for acorn, bread with acorn flour and shepherd's bake as well, which I think you can find all these things online, but we'll give the links later so people can have a look. But yes, the idea is giving a reason behind, each recipe as well, in terms of what are we living through now and how has that changed from before. So it's a little bit of a clue as to how things are societally as well. So an analysis through food, really.
It's very intriguing. It's very interesting because we are reading the story, or we're reading these stories, and we never pay attention to the food. And what you're doing here is actually saying to us, look, just look at what the message is behind this person's habits and routines and the things that he or she is eating, or this family is eating. So, and we are missing this out. We don't pay attention what they're just eating. And you're just telling me about Frankenstein. I never thought of that. We always analyze the monster, this relationship with this father, the creator, the godly thing. We look into gender things. We look into how it was born. We look into everything, but no food. So
and now we do, Alicia.
And I love it because we were missing out so much information. It was the time, yes.
It's time because of the pressure that we as people are being put on when it comes to choosing what food we eat now. It's become our social responsibility to eat differently, to eat less meat because of environmental issues. And that just prompts one to look back in time and see, right, well, what was important before and why, and what was changing in society then. So that's what interests me. It goes hand in hand with kind of historical analysis as well.
Yes.
But the recipes are delicious, I just want to say.
Yeah, because you've tried them and they're good, and you historically you kind of doing something for the food area as well. For I don't know, when people start reading these, restaurants are might want to start recreating.
It's definitely something to think about, as in kind of a Gothic style supper or dinner.
Yeah.
You can take a recipe from each chapter and do that. Definitely. And cocktails. The drink was quite important as well. So I think
things have changed as well, and how that is also in the language, being someone that teaches the language myself, and I'm worried about communication. the fact that you say tea time. You know, I remember tea time, first time I went to England, and tea time, I thought that everybody was going to be drinking tea. And I'm thinking, when are we properly eating here in this country? Bless you.
No, thank you. Yeah, I think also that the times have changed, and what we would have, I don't know, perhaps people have tea time at 4. For example, in Rebecca, it's 4 o'clock, it's tea time, and it's always on the dot. And that becomes some sort of real kind of something that she dreads. Rebecca, the second Mrs. De Winter, I should think, not Rebecca, the second Mrs. De Winter. I don't know if you know the story. She marries Maxim and she moves into Manderley, this amazingly beautiful house. And she feels oppressed. And this oppression comes from meal times as well, because she would like to eat under a chestnut tree and have her sandwiches and tea and just on her own. But she has to go into Manderley, go into the tea room, sit down, and this monstrous teapot and all the crockery and everything around her they become the monsters. So she feels oppressed by this display. And that's in one of the illustrations that we saw before by Lee. So it looks nice, but the context of what she's feeling and how she feels trapped, then and kind of trapped in the mystery of, and also trapped by Mrs. Danvers' behavior, who is the dreaded housekeeper.
Yeah, like the food, like in an oppressive way, a manipulative way.
Yes.
And also because you're talking here social class, we're not just talking about the identity. That is one of the things I like talking about here, but also social class. Yeah, again, depending on your social class, that will define your identity too, so we can escape it.
Yes.
But yeah, these routines that we have integrated and what they mean to us. Yes, it's fascinating, all this, and it's making me think back to when I lived in the UK, and culturally it was a shock, because in my English classes nobody had ever told me that people drank tea and they put milk on that. They never told me about the sugar, non-sugar on tea, which is something that you told me about when we were talking the first time. And it's amazing the message behind that and your experience with sugar, and how you kind of worry about sugar, and how everything, this cookbook idea, it didn't just start with Ella telling you, hey, I'm looking for this book. You went back in time.
Yes.
And that reminded you of a very specific moment in your childhood.
It did, because I had a babysitter who would put so much sugar in her tea, and when I started drinking tea, I started copying her and putting lots of sugar in my tea. And my father said, don't do that, because we don't do that. Now, I'm half Venezuelan, he's Venezuelan, and I was confused by this, because I was born in London and I didn't see that there was anything wrong. Obviously, from his background, he would see that as something very British, and he didn't feel fully British. He was Venezuelan, and he didn't identify in that food space with that excessive consumption of sugar. So when he said to me, they do this, not us, I realized that there was some sort of clash going on there. So definitely that's influenced this sense of what is other and what is dangerous, and what that would mean if I did do that. It was quite disappointing for him. So, and that was a memory that that kind of came to me only recently, when I finished writing my thesis, which is all about sugar. And I remembered this possibly is what is the real origin of why I wanted to write about this, because and it's what we discussed before, there's power and danger in sugar in ways that we are not necessarily part of on a daily basis, because we're so cut off from how sugar is produced. And I think with many things, if we saw the sites of production and how things are produced, we probably wouldn't eat them, and we probably wouldn't consume them in the same way, sometimes thoughtlessly. So yes, I think that's a big part of my studies, and also to raise awareness of that, I think, is important as well. And we can see that through literature. Most of the time, the writers that talk about this are not fully aware that they are using food in this way. So that's another thing I wanted to go back to when you talked about things that we don't notice. We don't really notice the food in these novels. We don't notice, it's not a main central part of the Gothic novel, the food, but actually, because it isn't a central part, it is so interesting to see what it does in the text, because it is sending us signals and messages that are appealing to our subconscious, and we're subconsciously categorizing a character as perhaps good or bad because he overeats. So, for example, in Jane Eyre, again, her cousin overeats. He's very greedy, and he eats all these tarts and sweet things, and that's seen as a negative, and it says, he would die young. So we don't necessarily think, that connection between food and character, but it is there, and it does contribute to how we perceive the text and what we think of the story and the characters. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fascinating. I mean, I like always to go back to the whys, because there's so much information there about why do we do things, and how the people can learn from that. So yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. I'm gonna go to something else now. Well, I want to show this first. Whoops,
Yes.
where's ours? There you go. So I've been putting it all the time. Look, it's all over the place. So for people to support the book, and I mean, if there are other links that you want to send me later, you can think of. Obviously, I would like to also thank Ella Buchan and Lee Henry, because he's the guy with the illustrations.
Yes, so Ella's really busy at the moment with work, and weren't able to, but perhaps in the future.
Yeah, I hope so, because then we can have this party time talking about the book, and
she's developing the recipes as well as everything else, and she's, her speciality is obviously matching, finding the best possible recipe that would fit with the text. So yes, doing that. So once that's more developed, because the thing is, at the moment we're 85% funded, so we haven't reached 100 yet, so we're just waiting, and then there will still be some time, obviously, to continue with the testing of the recipes and everything else. So yes, hopefully we'll be funded soon, because it would be great to have it out by Halloween.
Oh, that'd be fantastic. So that's when you're thinking of launching it? Yes.
Yes.
That's so
all
good.
goes well and we're fully funded. Yes.
Tell us a bit about now the process of the creation of this creature, of your baby, because a lot of people out there also have ideas for books, for niches, and then we all find this moment where, okay, am I self-publishing? Am I going to go for an editorial? Am I going to go, like in your case? I'm really fascinated about it, and I'm really interested as well, because I think it would be very useful to teach or to tell other people that might have similar thoughts on their own space. How can this be done, and what are the steps?
Yes.
And not to be scared, because I'm thinking about myself sometimes. I think, well, there's this big wall of indie authors, self-publishing. Am I going with an editor? Because you have an idea, but then the idea needs to go out there. So how do you transition as well? Because that can be like a right mental block for the writer, for the creator.
Yes, I think the Gothic is always so cutting edge, isn't it? It always has these different ways. It never stops. It always evolves. Anything I can think of has a Gothic aspect, or is in some way Gothic. And it might be because I love the Gothic, but I've heard other people say this as well. And that's why there are so many authors that self-publish, and so many different mediums just to get the Gothic out there. It doesn't really matter how, and there's no prejudice against this. There are self-published authors that are amazing and have produced amazing work. So I think for us, we did approach traditional publishers, and they just thought, well, every answer was kind of the same. It was, there are so many cookery books out there, this is going to be just one of many, and it's not for us, it's too niche. If it doesn't already exist, it means there isn't a market. So we were kind of not discouraged by this, but we thought, right, we have to find a different way of doing this. And we approached Unbound, and the next day they got back to us. That's how enthusiastic they were. And I think the problem with traditional publishing is that it's risk averse. So there's this model, which is the advance and royalties, which makes it really hard for first time or debut writers to break into the system. And it's hard for established writers to break out of their niche as well. So it really Unbound as a crowdfunding platform offers a lot more flexibility. And I think it bridges this gap between authors and the audiences, and it allows readers to have real input into the kind of books that get published. And they also treat the author-publisher relationship as a partnership, which is something new, it's something different. It brings also, we are nearly fully funded through the power of social media. We've created a community online, and if you were with a traditional publisher, you probably wouldn't be doing all this marketing for yourself. But the fact that we do, then it's actually such a positive thing. It's hard work, but you get to know the right people, the people who could potentially really be interested in this book. And then that carries on even afterwards. So, you never know afterwards what you might want to publish, and you already have that community there. So it's a really great idea.
Yeah, you're building an audience. And nowadays, every creator, we have that. You have to build an audience.
Yes.
And there are ways that do not work. The Facebook, for example, the groups, it's just people read, but they don't engage. And it's very difficult for a content creator like we are to find the right platform for you, the right people. And yes, eventually you get in your tribe. But I think it's very important that people have clear that don't postpone your ideas, just get on with your project, because it might be something beautiful, very useful for a lot of other people, for you as well, mainly for you, because it's something that you got in your head, you need to get it out.
Yes.
Because you find it useful. It's a curiosity and interest that you've had, and a lot of people can actually appreciate that. If you've never come up with this idea, I would have never thought of it myself, because yes, I'm in the Gothic space, but I'm in the ghostly, I'm the identity and the ghostly, and because I'm an INFP, and then all these things, So there's someone comes and says to me, look at the food in these Gothic books. Okay, you got me there because I'm in the Gothic space, but the food, yes. And we were talking about it the other day, now just before we opened the microphones, I got stomach issues, and how important it is to eat properly, or the right thing, or why when you get stressed out, my Achilles is my stomach, so I need to take medication, because if I overdo, I overeat certain amount of things, or fats, or fried food and things like that, how it affects my stomach. But it's not just my stomach, I can't sleep, then the day after my head is really foggy, that affects my cognitive perception of the world and my performance. Is such an important thing, and we've been missing it out. So I think it's really important that the message is there for people who find that their ideas can be supported by groups like Unbound. So that's really is fantastic. So it's basically crowdfunding, and you just keep working as people donate, and they do
keep going. Yes. I mean, it's unlikely now that we won't reach our target. We're really nearly there. We're just 15% away. So
I hope that when people see these, they keep supporting, because it's going to be fantastic. I mean, I'm going to get it. I'm going to get there, because I now am so intrigued about the fact that there are essays and there's analysis, and I'm a learning junkie, so I'm going to get my hands there. It's just that there are a lot of options when we go to the webpage. When people visit the webpage, they're going to see that you can get like different
types of pledges. So you can pledge for a hardback or an ebook. And we have this great thing that Lee does, which is a Gothic pet portrait. So you can actually get your pet, a portrait of your pet, and he will do it in the Gothic style for you.
I couldn't fit here, but I saw that there are lots of things that you can get. It's fantastic.
Yes. So do have a look and see. Yes, because it's got some interesting pledges. I think there is still one where Ella and I will be dressed as, the second Mrs. De Winter and Mrs. Danvers, and we'll bring you tea. We will bring you cakes and everything necessary for a tea time at home to your address. So
that's
a great one.
That's amazing. I'm just surprised how much you can stretch the idea by just concentrating on that idea, how far it'll go.
I don't think we can go to Spain, but in the UK.
I can imagine it. And look, when I visit my parents-in-law, if you want to come up to Preston, you're very welcome. Or my sister-in-law, she lives in Leeds. We just meet up.
We'll bring you Rebecca tea time.
Yeah, fantastic. We were talking now, just the last time we met, we talked about how we can see food on television, the kids, the messages. And as I was putting this together based on that conversation and what I was thinking about for today, I came up with this Tim Burton, because we talked about it. Yes. Tim Burton is obsessed with food.
Yes, he is.
And the messages, and I've not realized, you made me look into this and think into this. So thank you for that, because my brain went like, oh my God.
I know we both have an interest in creepy children, and
we do. Yeah. We have creepy children.
I know this.
So yeah, Tim Burton, I mean, I picked these four, but I'm sure that in the others there's food as well. There are rituals. I mean, food for Tim Burton is like a ritual.
It is. And food can really lure, especially when it comes to children. As we said before, with chocolates and sweet things, it lures children in and it makes them feel secure. It makes them feel rewarded. There's nothing wrong in the eyes of a child when you give them, an excess of chocolate necessarily. And I think they play on this a lot. I mean, even the Chronicles of Narnia, there's the Ice Queen, I think it is, or the White Queen, the Ice Queen. I think she lures one of them with Turkish delights, doesn't she? And she tries to, that's how she gets what she wants. So, yes.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, so much in there. And now we're going to be all, who watches this later, they're going to start looking into food in everywhere, and they're going to find amazing information there. But yeah, like, for example, in when we have these celebrations, if we look at Alice in Wonderland, I had to have it because I'm Alice in Gothic Land, because of my non-like of the story. So that's something that people can read about on Medium, if anybody follows me there. And my brand is based on a book I hate. So I had to have it here today. So, but yeah, this celebration, this table full of food for this tea party, and it gets really messy, and it gets really, even you feel like you're full. It kind of makes you feel sick.
How many times have we been to places like this where we go to a wedding and we think there is so much food, there is no, and it depends on the culture, obviously, but there is so much alcohol, so much food, and you're putting an excess down because you want to show something. You want to show that this is a celebration. So the quantity of food will be, proportionate to how much you want people to know and your guests to feel like, yes, we are really splashing out. This is a big, big event. And it symbolizes that. Then if you get messy with it and you start throwing it around, that might symbolize something different. It might symbolize that you can afford so much that you don't really need to. It's just there for show,
Yeah. I'm not, a little bit in this case. I suppose that's what we could tell about Beetlejuice round down on the right at the bottom, the fourth picture, that we have this celebration, don't we? And it looks like everything in this house is extreme and is super fashionable, and all of a sudden this food comes alive, and you're like, oh my God, you just creeped out.
There is something so wrong, isn't there, when we see things like hands or teeth or eyes in something which is food, because it's something about our boundaries of food. There are many things that we eat where we would think, actually, when we think about it, it should be wrong. It should be, in a sense, a taboo. As Mary Douglas would say, who's an anthropologist who talks a lot about food boundaries and what we consider to be right or wrong isn't right, or, can be right or wrong for someone else in another culture, in another context or another time. So when we think about even if we go back to horror films, you know, we find that our main character has just found an eye in her soup. For sure, something is going to happen now, but is going to compromise her safety. It's just something is not right. So that's really, I think, and that bottom right picture is what people think. If I say Gothic food or food and horror, they think blood and gore and intestines and hands falling out. So that's why also perhaps the idea of a Gothic cookbook was a little bit unusual. And when I first said that, people were like, well, these things don't match. Food doesn't match with horror. Food doesn't match. But if you look at it from a different perspective, obviously as an interpretation, and it's not just for show, that's obviously a spectacle, isn't it? So it wants to make us feel disgusted. I'm not a fan of feeling disgusted in horror film. I'm not a gore or splatter person, personally. I'm more into the supernatural.
Yeah, so every so often I might do watch, but not into goats and things like that. But it's where we find the unheimliche, we find these uncanniness, is the familiar become unfamiliar, and that's what creeps us out. And the food about the picture of this kid eating chocolate, but also look at the father in the background. It's just gross.
Yeah, with the meat.
And we eat that because but it's the amount of food that you can see there. And for some reason, when there's a lot of amount of food, you put always people that are a bit large. So there's a connection information here. You are what you eat, and then your size can depend on that. And then you could always imagine someone that is a little bit overweight, like stuffing their face with food, and maybe they actually have a problem. I can't think of the word now. Something immune, the immune system. It doesn't matter how much they eat; they just have this tendency. But we associate, as you were saying before, we associating certain actions with certain looks as well. And you were telling me the other day about people in this new fashion of let's not eat because it's like a new thing, and then that makes you look better and looks more intelligent even. So that's really, really creepy.
Yeah, well, I mean, fasting has always existed and it serves its purpose, and that's fine. But I think that the idea of the bodily shape signifying different things is also an interesting one in relation to food, because that also changes, and we might think that someone extremely evil is potentially tends to be very, very thin. But even now with Disney, and you see all these backstories of all these evil people and how we're reevaluating how evil they really are, because we're looking at originally what did they do to become evil. So we have the backstory of, for example, Cruella de Vil with the news, where it explains, why she became that evil. It's nearly like we have to go back to, to the origin story to understand where that's the kind of, where that comes from, where those bad acts come from, and why they occur. But yes, that's an interesting trend at the moment. I think there's another one's just come out now where it says it's boring to be good or something. It's a new Disney or Pixar one. So boring to be good, or it's good to be bad, or something like that. So we want to highlight the fact that also many children will probably think, well, actually evil characters are quite good looking. Before it used to be a witch with maybe a huge nose, disproportionate, and also that in itself is quite problematic because it doesn't signify anything. But in cartoons or in the mind of a child, that would have been the association. And then now, for example, you get quite handsome evil characters,
Maybe vampire.
My own daughter said to me it was about someone in, I think it was in Cruella, or Maleficent. She's like, if she's so evil, why does she look so good? There's this beauty now in being bad.
So again, identity. Now we're starting to identify ourselves with certain characters because they look good. So we want to look like them, and therefore we have to behave like they do. Oh, it's so wrong, isn't it? It's the message.
You might aspire to that, or you might get, again, this is all perhaps going on more in the subconscious, so it's not something that you would
Sure.
decide, and say from now on. But it's something that's the importance of media in this, like, is fundamental, because we get all these little messages, these messages, where we always see the same type of character having the same type of destiny and fate in a film, and we think, well, I need to be like this if I'm going to have a romantic liaison with someone who looks like this, necessarily. If I eat this, things are not going to go well for me because I'm going to end up like this, or I might, all of this is really to do with what the media and what films and stuff like that do to us.
Sure, so much
we watch a lot of films now. We've been watching, especially during the pandemic, been really exposed to more and more series and films.
Yeah, and then the food that goes in there, and oh yeah, it's fascinating. And we've got also cannibalism, like we have here. You mentioned that before as well, about body parts and things, but being fed food that we don't know where it comes from. And in Sweden, that's a perfect example, because it's gruesome, this film. I mean, it's just like, I could only watch it once because of the ending. But I mean, Tim Burton, I love Tim Burton, so it's like, I will have to watch it again. But it's terrible. How many times haven't you not seen a piece of news, someone precisely doing this? I mean, this is fiction, but it happens that people have killed people and put them in pies, and people have done disgusting things in McDonald's with some of the body parts I'm not going to mention. They put them on mayonnaise sauces, or so that's a way of actually saying, I'm against you. Identity again is just like trying to say, I'm against what's happening here, and this is my way of going against it, or to show my opinion. And then even taking revenge on people,
Yes, it's an issue. It raises the question of trust and how we trust these establishments. Especially, you mentioned McDonald's, places like restaurants, places like cafes. We don't really know what goes on behind closed doors. We trust that the food that reaches our table has been dealt with hygienically. And that's just something that is fascinating, because why would one necessarily think that it couldn't happen? But we're prepared to accept this because it's part of our culture and it's part of how we socialize. We need to trust, and I think that's important. That's an important part of who we are. But it's again full of contradictions, highlighted by food. In fact, there's a really great film called Get Out, and there's a scene where it's really creepy. The kitchen door opens and you see something, and then it shuts again. And it's just that glimpse into something that isn't quite right. And then everyone else is at the table. And it's this separation. Again, what Sydney Mintz was talking about, with the sites of production. We don't know what happens at some point. At some stage, we need to trust. So it's how much trust do you put into that?
Is when you think about what they can do, and
not to think too much.
No.
That's what I've done for the last 3 years about.
It's amazing. Also, you mentioned folklore, and you mentioned also for kids, and we've got in fairy tales. You talked to me about Hansel and Gretel, and oh my God, yes, we've got again chocolate, but then we have cannibalism. And an old woman, like you were just saying before, the same in Snow White with the poisoned apple, something that's so lovely. And apples are cursed forever. And then in Little Red Riding Hood, we call the basket. Is the thing that triggers a lot. And in Beauty and the Beast, which is one of my favorite cartoons and stories, I know that the messages might not be ideal for everybody, but I just love it's my favorite, right? And again, there's food, the banqueting, in a way, through your stomach, you can gain this love or trust on people. So getting this trust through food as well, and for kids. Very nice.
Well, they say that stomach is like the second brain, so we have to trust our gut sometimes, don't we? So it's just as important, and it provides, whatever you put there is, as they say, if you are what you eat, it's important what you put in there, like in terms of your behavior. That's also problematic, and it's not necessarily grounded in anything real, but in terms of the stories, it's the symbology of it, and obviously the symbology of the apple, which is probably, very, very important in lots of stories for a reason, which is maybe more akin to religion. But the fairy tales, they're incredible when you think some of the things that still persist now. So the sweetness is still very much a main character in anything to do with, especially with children.
Yes. That's why your research really goes into the sugar, because it really goes everywhere, doesn't it? It's not like something that is not nice and pleasant, then obviously there's not much to talk about. But something that is bad for you but is nice, that's where we have this controversial conversation, maybe. But it tastes nice, but it's bad for you. And what people say, don't they? They always say, why is it that the worst things, the unhealthier things, are the things that you enjoy the most?
Yes, but let's not forget also, to begin with, sugar had a really important function of, people used to die from eating fruit from the trees. It was something that was a real problem. Through sugar, we were then able to preserve fruit and make it safe for people to eat. So again, we have the positive that is tied to the negative always. And there's always been a real wanting to preserve food, because it's difficult to look for food day to day. There was always a will to preserve as much as possible so that it would keep for the future. And sugar was one of those things that was also really important in terms of preserving food, and so allowing people to live a more sedentary life, a safer life. So again, we have that connection between the good and the bad.
So I guess that you have learned lots of things through this research, as well as your own intuition and your own experience in kitchen. I have to say that is very important, because you used to work in
I worked in a restaurant for 10 years, and so I was in close contact with the kitchen, and I had the real kind of it was a real illuminating experience to see how a Michelin-starred kitchen works, and how people kind of worked with food, and the importance of food for those people. So it was an unforgettable experience.
Yeah, I think it's an important piece of information as well for those who don't know about this book, because sometimes, some people do not care about who writes a book. But if you are like me, I like to know why this person wrote it, what were the reasons, but also the experience with that topic. And I think it brings a lot more trust in this book, the fact that you know what you're talking about. Because you're not just in the Gothic space, you were also in the food space. So you're talking from the experience, but also as a mom, you have a child. So all these, and probably for Ella, we would have to see her background and what drew her to do this collaboration with you as well. And probably we will find this book brings all these pieces of you two, and the illustration.
So many pieces, and it's so difficult to sometimes to match them up, because chronologically they come at different times, but to have the privilege to work in a restaurant of that caliber and with those people I think is quite rare, and for such a length of time, that I was able to really appreciate the people who have the passion for food and who are able to relay that passion to others, and then it carries on in generations to come. It's one of those places. So I was also very lucky in that sense.
It's fantastic. Well, we've been an hour now talking about this fantastic book. Time flies when you're having fun. And people, supporters, we get into the end. Supporters, coffee.com, Alice in Gothic Land 1402. That's for the whole project, but also to support Alessandra there, because that's an extra and it's something apart I want to ask for. If you like the interview and her work, that's also something that I'm gonna be sharing with her. But then we obviously we have these want to support the book itself and the other people in the book. So there's like two kinds of support, the person coming here today and the group of people working on the cookbook. It's lovely. I mean, go and visit this page, because I couldn't just show everything, and I want people to really go and see on the webpage all the options and to read it, because it's amazing. You give so many different possibilities. I've never seen anybody offering so many things from the same book. And so it's like, this is the book, buy it. No, it's, you can either buy this, or you can buy that, or you can get this. If you pay this much, you get this. It's fantastic. I mean, it's a great idea. So it's
Thank you.
yeah,
and thank you for talking to me today so that I could explain a bit more about the book.
Yeah, I hope that you've managed to say things here that you might have not covered in other places, because
yes,
not to be special or anything, but just maybe so when people see you in different interviews as well, they get different sides and more
definitely
and more things out of the book. So the more we know about it, the more people will be interested in buying it. So, but we can also find you in your social media. So I encourage people to follow you on Twitter. There you are, Food for Flow. And in Instagram, you Sa Charlie. Well, Sasa Charlie. You don't have to explain, but it's interesting that you have everywhere. But yeah, follow you.
Thank you.
And I mean, and support people. Follow, support, share. If you cannot economically support, as we were saying, you can also support by telling other people, because you never know who you might be helping as well. So that's fantastic. And this is me. I'm all over the show. This is not really good. It's just too much for me. But I keep adding places. Gonna have to analyze what is really not working and remove it from there. But welcome to Alice in Gothic Land, everyone. Thank you for this time, Ali. I'm so happy.
Thank you so much.
I've enjoyed this so much. I've learned so much, which is the thing with these interviews. Not just interviewing per se, for the sake of interviewing someone. Is, you know, for me, is a process. I follow the person, I see if we engage, and then I read the stuff. And in your case, I can't read it yet because it's not out there yet. But I know more about this and your project, and it's brought a lot of light, and I hope it's going to help a lot of people to look into their text from a different point of view.
Yes.
Analyze things more, use the critical thinking, because this is what we are all about as well. And Alice in Gothic Land is about creating awareness in a lot of spaces. And I also bring people that have that, you know, this critical thinking, that look at things from a holistic point of view, and you bring your experience and your studies and your research. And well, what's next for you, Alessandra? What's next? So finishing the book, obviously, and then
that's a priority. That's a priority for now. I can't think further ahead now, because I've just got to get this. We've got to get this done, and that's going to take a few months at least to conclude everything. So yeah, some busy times ahead. But I hope to go on holiday soon, because after the PhD, I feel like I should go on a very long holiday.
Yeah, you deserve it. And I hope that you, with this being a doctor now, you can also see ahead all the projects and
yes,
and I'm sure
lots of interesting things to come, I think, and I'm really excited, both in the space of food and of cultural memory, which is what I love as well.
That's great. So all the people have to do is follow you, support you, and then wait for more good things to come along.
We will update people as they pledge. Obviously, we send updates and let them know how we're getting on and when to expect the book.
That's so cool. Fantastic. Well, I hope to see you soon again in the program. I know that we have to have a little chat, you and I. And then there'll be surprises.
Perfect. Thank you so much again. Thank you.
Thank you. See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.